In this module, I'm going to talk to you about what money actually is. And this might sound redundant or kind of dumb to you, right? Because you're like, well, I know what money is. It's this stuff that I can buy stuff with, right? But the reason I'm going to go into such depth here and detail so that you can truly understand what's happening around you in the world of money. This is not necessarily theory. There's some theoretical aspects to it, but the financial system works in a very specific way. And these are really core concepts that you're going to need to understand if you're going to have the breakthroughs that we were just discussing, like in the mindset video, right? Some of it might make you angry. You might have a reaction to it. And so I'm just going to ask you to suspend that for a moment, receive what I'm telling you, and write down what comes up. Write down the emotions and the thoughts and the feelings and the ideas and the questions and the doubts and everything that comes up as I'm going through this. Because if you can bring to your awareness those questions, those doubts, those, basically everything that's on your mind at the level of subconscious, if you can bring it, put it on paper, bring it to your level of awareness, and kind of run through it and think about it as you go through this course, you're going to have a lot of breakthroughs. So what even is money? In the olden days, right? Think about like in pre-colonial tribal times, for example, people were trading animal furs and rocks and sticks and jewelry, right? This was the barter exchange system, right? So people would exchange these things. And of course, there's plenty, you guys probably already know. I'll try and skip over the stuff that's blatantly obvious, which is, in this case, you probably already know if you want a piece of jewelry, it's not necessarily the same value as a cowhide, right? So there was a fundamental issue of exchange here. Money, of course, by definition, all of these things that they're trading could be seen as money. So they're paying money with a cowhide for a piece of jewelry. Well, that cowhide is technically money by definition. Money is a means of exchange of value. So the reason it's important to understand this is because the financial system that we're in today operates on currency. And the difference between money and currency is this. Money is just the means of exchange. A currency is a means of exchange with assigned value issued by a government. So this is kind of the government mandated money. It's the U.S. Mint, Federal Reserve, all these institutions print money. We'll get into that. But they basically make currency available for use as money within an agreed upon system of exchange. So what we have with money is basically a government-controlled asset, piece of paper, that of course is backed by debt. Now, this is a really key thing to understand. If you truly understand this, it's going to blow away your perception about, money and the value, right? Most people have this pedestalized view of money because it has this like forced intrinsic value. But the reality is the forced intrinsic value is backed only and solely by debt. Because debt is issued, for example, when you take a loan at a bank, you're not necessarily borrowing depositor funds. Debt is being issued. The bank is printing the money out of thin air because you are signing that debt into existence. And of course, with an agreement to repay. When it comes down to this concept of what is money, well, money is the means of exchange, and currency is a form of money that's issued by a government. Now, when we look at the fiat system, for you crypto people, they've been raging about this as kind of like the sole point of value for cryptos, the fact that it's a closed system. It's not necessarily based on fiat currency, but, we're not going to talk about crypto in this. We're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about the existing system. But the point of bringing that up is that, yes, the US dollar is a fiat currency. And as a fiat currency, that means its sole value is based on debt. So I don't know the exact statistics, but let's say there's, we know there's about 30 trillion in debt, right? The national debt, $30 trillion in debt. From that debt, I'm going to guess, let's just say there's 5 trillion in US dollar banknotes. Of course, 80%, 70% of the money in the money supply is digital. It does not exist as paper banknotes. So that's also key to understand. But let's say this is your pool of money to possibly draw your net worth value out of, okay? Because this is the main system. I'm not going to get into the international stuff here, but essentially, yes, these systems are all connected through the central bank, Bank of International Settlements, all these things that exist from a wider scope on the global financial system, but we're just going to talk about the U.S. financial system in this case, assuming that you live in the U.S. And if you don't, wherever you live has a similar system built the same way. So you have this currency that's paper issued currency that basically runs on this substrate of common law, right? The common law legal system. There's other legal systems, or there's other ways to perceive or look at the legal system. Again, I'm not an attorney, but the reason you need to understand this is because this is what's solely encompassing all of this. We're just going to label it as commerce, okay? Commerce is the exchange of goods and services. Commerce is the proverbial playing field of money and wealth. And every time you go to a store, you buy something, you get a receipt, you are engaging in commerce, okay? So commerce is the system of money, of exchange. This is the current financial system that you are engaged in. And you exist outside of this as a kind of a natural living person, a human, a spirit, however you want to define yourself. This system exists. You're born into the system. You guys probably heard there's some conspiracies and some sovereign citizen stuff that this goes into, but we're not talking about how to play that game. We're talking about how to play the real game, which is, sure, I'm sure there's some sovereigns who are going to say, well, they're going to argue that point with me, but that's fine. But we're here to teach you about the system so that you can become a successful player in this game. This is the game that we're living in, okay? This world, common law world, the world of money, the world of the legal fiction, the world of the financial system, it all exists as a legal fiction in the common law system, which makes the US dollar and all other fiat currencies monopoly money. It is monopoly money. What happens in monopoly when the bank runs out of money, runs out of banknotes? There's a little note in the guide that says the bank can simply print more money, right? And that's true here. So if we are born in to the world, and in the world there's this kind of a substrate of commerce that's overlaid over reality through the legal system, this is common law, commercial, all other forms of law essentially, govern this system. It governs your existence in that sense. So you're born, you're issued a birth certificate, you're issued a social security card. Now you are a U.S. citizen. You now have a license to play in the game of commerce. You have a license to play in this game. And if you don't understand this aspect of this legal fiction reality that's been superimposed upon our natural spiritual life, then it's going to be hard to master it. So the reason I'm going into this is because it's critical to understanding what money is and how you can play the game. So this is the first iteration and overview of understanding that if you say you want more money, what you want is more power and more ability to transact in this game of commerce. That's really what you're looking for. Why? Because if you transact in the game of commerce, you can buy houses, you can buy food, you can buy clothes, you can buy all sorts of things, right? So you can buy all this stuff in commerce. Because everybody else playing the game and transacting in the world of commerce is subjected to the same general guidelines and rules of law. And, the political and legal and financial system are all, working in tandem. And so, having this knowledge is already going to give you a leg up from probably 90% of people who will never understand or take the time to look at or understand how the system works, and to have a framework of understanding of what it is in relation to you as an individual. So the next thing that's going to help you understand what money is and how it works in the context of that system, we have to look at debt and interest. So one of the things that I want you guys to think about is this, because the majority of the financial system runs on interest. You get a simple interest loan for a car, you buy a house, you pay amortized interest, you're paying interest. You're paying interest on your credit cards, you borrow money, you're generally paying interest. Of course, when you learn how to play the game, you will not be paying interest for a majority of the money that you use. We're going to get into that, specifically credit. But let's say this is the only $100 in existence, right? We're going to start from a very simple point to understand the money. This is the only $100 in existence. This guy is going to lend that $100 to this guy for 10%. And the reason I'm doing this is so you truly understand interest. Now, this is a fictional story. In the beginning, Joe lent Jack $100 and asked for 10% interest. So he sends it over to Jack, takes it, plus $100 in the account. But now he's got to pay back $110. And this is the kicker, right? If this is the only $100 in existence, well, where is he going to get that extra $10 from? Where's that coming from? And I want you guys to think about this for a second, because this is a very small scale of what's happening on a much larger scale. Where's the $10 coming from? Well, in this instance, it doesn't exist. It just literally does not exist. Where's he going to get the $10 from if it doesn't exist? He borrowed the only $100 in existence and has to come up with a 10%. In the world of commerce, of course, let's say, this is no longer the only $100 that exists. We have the $30 trillion in debt, and there's plenty of money to go around. Jack has to go into the marketplace. Remember that whole game of commerce? And he has to trade something of value for that $10. In this case, it's going to be labor, goods, services, etc., right? He's got to find a way to make that extra $10. So this kind of gives you a holistic view and understanding of what happens when you take on debt. The irony of this whole thing being is, of course, the fact that this $100 really only represents debt within the system. It only represents debt. How could that be possible? How is it possible that you're paying your interest and your money, the money that you have, how is it possible that it's just simply debt? And the way to understand that is ultimately the way the financial system works. And so the way the financial system actually works is we have the Federal Reserve, which there's a lot of questions here, right? Because the Federal Reserve has shareholders, but they're not really elected or appointed. Some say it's a private corporation. We have the government, which basically says, one of the ways that it works is the government says, hey, we're going to sell you these bonds. So they create a debt, and the Federal Reserve gives them cash. Another way that it works is that, of course, the government political system sets the bank rates. You guys hear about the rates being raised and lowered. And so we have all these banks that are regulated by the government, right? The government regulates the terms of this game of commerce, right? Remember, this is just the game of commerce. The government regulates the terms, meaning the rules of the game. And so the rules of the game in the financial system within commerce in America is governed by something called fractional reserve banking. And fractional reserve banking says, essentially, that the banks can lend out 10 to 1 of what they have. So, let's say this bank has $10 million in depositor funds. This bank can now issue $100 million in debt. So when the banks issue debt, they're writing loans, they're underwriting mortgages, car loans, business loans, whatever it is. They're literally printing that money out of thin air off of somebody's ability to borrow or play the game, right? So let's say we have Jack here, and he's now we're going to up the numbers. He's going to take a $100,000 loan from this bank, no problem. As long as he's got the kicker of this, of course, is the bank wants a down payment. So not only are you offsetting the 10% to get your loan, in his case, 10% is $10K, they probably want $20K from him for that loan. So he'll put up his $20K, and now they give him $80,000 in cash, but he also is holding the debt. So now he's got $80,000 in cash, and he's got $100K in debt. And that debt, $100K in debt, again, that's part of this global financial system. What happens is that this debt note, there's a note, which is a bank note, an agreement to pay. This note just becomes an asset for the bank. It's just an asset. It's the bank's asset, which is why Kiyosaki would say your house is not an asset. It's the bank's asset. So what you're understanding here is that it's one big game of make-believe. So once you understand this about money, you'll understand that you're playing the game in a system. There are rules of the game in the system, and there are there's rules of engagement, right? So understanding debt, cash, and interest, this gives you a little bit more of a view and understanding of what's happening in the world of money, right? So I'm going to go into a lot more depth on a lot of these concepts. I'm cracking the ice here with some of these core concepts that are going to help you to understand the rules of the game, what the game is that you're playing, where these ideas and thoughts and beliefs came from that say you can't win the game, or whatever your beliefs are about money, and understand that this is a system that you have a license to play in. Now, most people are playing in this system unaware that they're playing in the system with a license. Your license is your citizenship, essentially, in a sense. In some cases, not even that. It's just the fact that you have a bank account inside the system. But so the reason that I bring all this up is that how are you going to win at a system if you don't understand it, right? Until you understand the nature of the game that you're playing and the nature of the system, well, you really can't have an advantage, because most people don't understand. They understand that money exists. They understand that, it impacts their survival. But without looking at it from this holistic view and understanding that you're a part of the system, and that the system is not necessarily bad. It's certainly flawed in many ways, but it's not necessarily bad. And many people can carve out really great lives for themselves in some aspect of this system, right? Because what happens in commerce? Inside commerce, that's where all business occurs. So business, transactions, retail, anything and everything that occurs in a financial transaction occurs inside of this realm of commerce. All right, so now that we understand what money is, it's basically monopoly money. It's basically a means of exchange to operate within a system. If you want to be successful in this system, well, you have to transact and operate by creating value and extracting that money from the marketplace. Now, you can extract as much money from this marketplace as you want, but it's still going to be beholden to the system. Let's say Jack's an entrepreneur and he eventually builds that $100 million in wealth. Well, that $100 million in wealth is still only usable and valid within the system of commerce. He's got to be a good guy. He's got to abide by the laws. He's got to abide by the system, and, or he can take his cash and run away to another, to a deserted island. But, you won't be able to go to a store and buy what you want there. So these are some of the just basically generally accepted fundamentals of money and the financial system that, if you can understand and accept them, is going to change your perspective. It's going to give you a broad scope perspective about what money is, what the money game is, and how you can approach breaking through to the next level of money. So as we proceed on the chapter of money, I want you guys to keep this in mind. And I hope you're writing down all those ideas and things that have come up for you so that we can look through and audit your money consciousness as it is. Start to understand that the system is not all bad. It may be flawed, but many people have created immense wealth and amazing lives by operating businesses, becoming wealthy within this system.